Street epistemology is actually more than just holding that philosophical stance.
Okay, right. So it's not just the underlying idea. What makes it a distinct approach then? Okay, let's try and unpack this a bit. We've got some really interesting stuff from Rational Ruminations that looks right at this human tightrope walk. Believing in truth, but accepting we might be wrong.
Exactly. We're looking at the connection between this idea, fallible absolutism,
Right?
and a specific way of having conversations called street epistemology. It's sort of about understanding how we hold our beliefs, well, a method for exploring them with others constructively.
So, fallible absolutism. Okay. At its heart, the idea is that there is an objective reality, right? A
Yes.
truth out there somewhere.
Yes.
But the fallible part that kicks in because, well, we're human, we're imperfect, our understanding is always going to be filtered somehow, maybe incomplete.
That's it. We can feel really certain, maybe have a strong conviction,
Yeah.
but acknowledging our fallibility means keeping a bit of intellectual humility.
Mm.
That awareness that we might not have the full picture.
Mm.
And this whole perspective, the research suggests, has a pretty strong link to street epistemology, or SE, as it's often called.
Okay, SE. For anyone who hasn't bumped into it before, street epistemology is a way to talk about beliefs, but it's not about winning an argument or anything.
No, not at all.
It's more about gently looking into how someone actually arrived at their belief, the process.
Right.
And the research points to a few key things. Building rapport is crucial, being respectful, finding common ground,
Super important, that bit.
and focusing on epistemology, a bit of a jargon word, but basically how we know things, not just what we believe.
Exactly, the how.
Then using open-ended questions, sort of like guiding someone to discover things for themselves.
Yeah.
And this shared sense of intellectual humility. The idea is just to get people thinking, reflecting on their own reasoning.
And our mission really with this deep dive is to get a handle on that relationship between believing in objective truth while knowing we could be wrong.
Fallible absolutism.
And this specific method, street epistemology. We want to see what makes SE distinct and maybe even think about whether that name, street epistemology, really nails what it's about.
Yeah. Hopefully we can offer you some clarity and maybe even a few surprising angles on beliefs and how we talk about them.
Let's dive in.
All right. So that core connection then, how does street epistemology actually operate within this idea of fallible absolutism?
Well, what's really interesting is that when someone's using SE, they're often exploring how reliable someone's methods are for getting to a belief.
Okay. Methods like
looking at evidence or relying on faith, maybe intuition or what some authority figure said. The conversation implicitly suggests that, well, some ways of knowing might be more dependable than others. And that very idea that there are better or worse ways to figure things out, it hints at an objective reality, doesn't it? A standard we're aiming for. That leans towards the absolutist part.
That makes sense. So if someone says, I just know it in my gut, an SE conversation might explore gently, how reliable that gut feeling has been before, or how you'd tell a gut feeling from wishful thinking, maybe.
Precisely. That exploration itself suggests we're trying to get closer to something more accurate, more reliable.
Okay.
And at the very same time, a huge part of these conversations is encouraging the person to consider if they might be mistaken. To think about the possibility of error,
Right.
Their reasoning or the info they used. And that's where the fallibilist aspect really shined through. Often you're talking to people who are incredibly sure, like a 10 out of 10 certainty.
Yeah, total conviction.
And SE gently nudges them to consider that maybe, just maybe, their understanding isn't perfect. And this is where it gets really interesting. You see that dance between strong belief and an openness to maybe being wrong.
It's like a balancing act, isn't it? Holding a belief strongly, but leaving the door slightly ajar for new information or a different angle.
Exactly. And SE seems to offer a practical way to manage that balance in a conversation.
Plus, recognizing that you could be wrong too, that just fits perfectly with the whole fallibility idea.
Absolutely, hand in glove. But the research makes a really important point here. While this philosophical connection is significant, street epistemology is actually more than just holding that philosophical stance.
Okay, right. So it's not just the underlying idea. What makes it a distinct approach then, separate from just philosophy?
Well, the paper really highlights that SE has a very specific way of doing things, a methodology for conversations.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about saying, hey, maybe you're wrong. It involves a particular way of using questions, Socratic questioning, adapted to help someone explore their own thinking.
So the types of questions, the pacing.
The pacing, the flow, how the whole discussion unfolds. Just believing we might be wrong doesn't automatically tell you how to have that kind of delicate conversation with someone else.
That's a really good point. It's one thing to accept fallibility in theory, quite another to have a practical method for exploring it respectfully.
Mhm.
And the research seemed to really stress how vital building trust and rapport is in SE. You can't just jump in with tough questions.
Absolutely not. You need to create that safe, respectful space first. That whole relational side, the human connection. That's not really baked into the philosophical concept itself.
Yeah, the philosophy is more abstract.
Exactly. And there's a strong ethical dimension to SE too.
Mm.
Emphasizing respect for the other person, avoiding any kind of pressure or trying to force them,
Right, no coercion.
and really focusing on understanding their perspective. It's not about winning or tearing down beliefs. It's about helping them reflect on their own thinking process.
So definitely not a debate tactic in disguise. Sounds much more collaborative.
Focus on insight. Yes, I think that's right. And the paper also mentions, SE is a skill. It's something you can learn and get better at.
Right, it's not automatic.
It involves real active listening, learning how to formulate effective questions, guiding the conversation helpfully. It takes practice. Sign up for our free course at navigatingbeliefs.com.
Okay.
And another thing, SE engages with a really wide range of ways people claim to know things. It's not just focused on logic or evidence. It looks at beliefs based on faith, emotions, intuition, trusting experts.
Uh-huh.
And it explores how someone sees the reliability of each of those sources for themselves. That's a much wider net than just saying, yeah, we can all be wrong sometimes.
Right, because someone whose belief rests on faith might think about reliability very differently from someone focused on scientific studies.
Totally different frameworks.
Yeah.
SE tries to understand those frameworks from the inside, so to speak. And ultimately, the goal isn't necessarily belief change. It's often just about encouraging understanding and self-reflection.
Mm-hmm.
Fallible absolutism acknowledges we could be wrong, but SE actively tries to create a space where that possibility can be explored, openly and respectfully.
Okay, that clarifies things a lot. So SE is this whole package. It fits with the philosophical view, sure, but it's also a very specific toolkit for conversations with its own ethics and skills.
Well put.
Now, this leads us to something really interesting the research brought up. The name itself. Street Epistemology. It hints that the name might be, well, maybe not ideal.
Yeah, the paper raises some good points there. Both parts of the name can potentially cause misunderstandings.
How so?
Well, street might make it sound informal, maybe even a bit confrontational or aggressive, which doesn't really capture the careful, respectful vibe of the actual method.
Yeah, I can see that. Street can have rough connotations.
And then epistemology, while it's technically accurate, it is about how we know it's definitely an academic philosophy term.
Right. Sounds a bit pointy-headed, maybe.
It could sound intimidating or just unfamiliar to lots of people. So the name itself might actually put some people off, acting as a barrier before they even find out what it is.
I get that. Epistemology isn't exactly everyday language, even if the ideas behind it are things we all grapple with. So the researchers actually suggested some alternatives.
They did, and they grouped them based on what aspect of the method they emphasize, which is quite neat.
Okay, like what?
Subscribing is the only way to keep the cows from learning TikTok dances. We have to save the world
Yeah, we have to protect the internet.
from dancing cows. So first, there were names focusing on humility and reflection. Things like humble inquiry
Humble inquiry, I like that. Focuses on the questioner.
or reflective dialogue, highlighting the goal for the person sharing beliefs. Open belief exploration was another in that vein.
Reflective dialogue. Yeah, it sounds less like a challenge, more like thinking together.
Then they had suggestions zeroing in on the process of figuring out how we know, like reasoning together, which sounds collaborative.
Yeah, like a shared journey.
Or the very direct exploring how we know. They even floated epistemic dialogue, but again, maybe still too jargony.
Exploring how we know is pretty clear, though. Hard to misunderstand that one.
True. Another category focused on building understanding and connection. Names like belief bridges.
Ooh, belief bridges. That's a nice image. Connecting across differences?
Conversations for understanding and common ground dialogue. Emphasizing finding shared ways of thinking, maybe.
Conversations for understanding. Again, very direct about the purpose. Less intimidating.
And finally, there were some more general, accessible options, like mindful conversations.
Mindful. Suggests care and attention.
The Understanding Project, which frames it as a bigger goal, and collaborative clarity.
Collaborative clarity also emphasizes working together to get clearer. It's actually fascinating how different names pull out different threads of the same practice.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How much a name can shape perception and maybe someone's willingness to even try something. Something that sounds less academic, maybe more focused on the human side of talking. Might just feel more inviting.
So, okay, let's try and wrap this up. Bringing this deep dive together, it feels like street epistemology has this really strong, compelling link to the idea of fallible absolutism, believing in truth, but knowing we're flawed. It operates right there.
Yeah, in that intersection.
But crucially, SE isn't just that philosophical view. It's a specific, carefully designed way to have conversations, built on respect, good questions, and a real interest in understanding and reflection, not just winning or changing minds.
Absolutely. And maybe, just maybe, a different name could help more people see that value.
It really offers a practical way to navigate that tension, doesn't it? Believing something is true, but being open to being wrong. Right in our everyday talks about important stuff.
Exactly. In the real world, not just in philosophy class.
So here's a final thought for you listening. Thinking about all those potential names, humble inquiry, reflective dialogue, exploring how we know, belief bridges, mindful conversations, collaborative clarity. Which one do you feel best captures what this method is all about? Its essence, its potential.
Yeah, and what difference might a name actually make? How might people perceive it or engage with it differently depending on what it's called?
Something to mull over. It really highlights how powerful language is, shaping how we connect with complex ideas.
Indeed.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today. We really hope it gave you a valuable shortcut to understanding these pretty fascinating concepts.